Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Manchester Poetry Library. My name's Andrew Macmillan. I'm Professor of Contemporary Writing here at Manchester Metropolitan University. If it's your first time in the Poetry Library, welcome, and do have a wander around. We've got this fantastic exhibition, Elemental, on at the minute, and we're going to say more about that throughout the course of this evening. It falls upon me, first of all, just to do the housekeeping, and so the toilets are just out of the door and then on your right, should you need to leave at any point during the evening. We've got fresh drinks at the back as well, so do keep yourself hydrated during this very hot weather. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm does go off, we will be doing the evacuation by poetry rules, which means the winner of the Costa Poetry Prize first, and then everybody else is on their own. But then we will just muster outside if the fire alarm does go off, which we don't anticipate it to do. I'm really honoured tonight to be here with my brilliant colleague and the wonderful poet Jean Sprackland to do a double launch in many ways. We're partly here to talk about Goyle, Chert and Mire, this astonishing new collection of poetry, but to do so surrounded by the exhibition Elemental, that again we're going to be talking a little bit more about that as we go through the evening, but do take a chance afterwards to wander around if you haven't already and take in this wonderful exhibition. In a moment, Jean's going to come up and begin reading from the first part of this tripartite collection. And then we're going to have a little bit of a conversation. There'll be a second reading, followed by another conversation, a third reading, then another little bit of conversation, and then a final poem just at the very end. Poetry is a world that so often seems ruled by kind of fad and fashion and brief kind of glimpses of something which then disappears very quickly, or conversations move on. And yet beneath that there are people whose river of talent runs just kind of constantly, I think, through the world of literature. And Jean, to me, is one of those poets, just one of our very best poets, who collection after collection is just forcing language into its purest form. In the previous collection, Green Noise, it seemed to me that she began some of the concerns that are then really brought to full force in this astonishing new collection, which has been quite rightly receiving rave reviews, and is really, it seems to me, Jean just writing at the pinnacle of her powers, which is this subtle and yet kind of utterly crystallized attention to language, to detail, and to the world around her. I'm going to let her say a little bit more about this collection as she introduces the first reading, but please welcome Jean Sprackland.
Thank you, and thank you, Andrew, for that amazing introduction. He's very good at, talking us up at moments when we need to be talked up, so thank you. Yes, so this book, Goyle, Chert, Mire, which is still very new, only came out a few weeks ago, is a book-length sequence of poems. It falls into three parts, as the name might suggest, the title might suggest. And each of these words, the three words, Goyle, Chert, and Mire, are like keys that you can use to understand a particular place. And that particular place is a valley in the Blackdown Hills, which is on the border of Somerset and Devon. It's not a very well-known area. It's very far from all the posher bits of Somerset, like Bath and Bruton and all those kind of civilised bits. It's a place where change seems to have come more slowly than in other places, and I might say a bit more about that later and why I think that is. And it's a place where you kind of always feel that the past is still there at the edge of the vision. And this book comes out of my deep engagement with that place over the last kind of 6 or 7 years. And there's a kind of overlapping narrative which is about an inner landscape, which comes really from an experience I had of viral meningitis back in 2020. And meningitis can have some very weird cognitive effects, including a kind of sense of that time has sort of become distorted, or isn't behaving in its normal way. Memory, holes in the memory that take a long time to kind of heal over. Brain fog, which we hear a lot about in relation to COVID as well. A similar kind of experience of brain fog. And so, I was in this place as I recovered from the meningitis, and the book, has ended up emerging out of both those experiences at the same time. So it's about place, it's about time, illness, but also about life, about that kind of, those moments where you realize the kind of intensity of being alive in the moment. So I'm just going to very briefly tell you what a Goyle is, in case you don't know. It's a southwest dialect word, and it refers to a particular kind of steep-sided ravine that has been scoured out by water over hundreds of years. There are a lot of these in the Blackdown Hills, and they're not places for people to go at all. They're kind of a kind of chaotic and often dangerous rubble of rocks and dead trees that have fallen in and are rotting. You can see some pictures of them, some photographs of them on that wall over there. It's a rather sunny day when those photographs were taken. On a different kind of day, it's much darker and more threatening. So maybe you'll have that in mind as I read these poems. I'm going to read a few poems from that first section, and I'm just going to read them one after the other without pausing to say anything in between, because they belong together and formed a kind of continuous narrative of sorts. So what you really need to know, actually, it says, if you look it up in the dictionary and you find the word Goyle, it will say etymology unknown. But it seems to me that it must be connected with the French word gueule, throat, and words like gullet. So I don't know why. That doesn't seem very mysterious to me. These places, it feels like a kind of throat, deep and closed in. So I'm just going to read a few of these poems, which are about exploring this place where no one in their right mind would go. Broken gate jammed across the ditch, tied with rope so old it has become interesting, and you suddenly remember art. Barbed wire, feed sack, rusty carburettor, matted corpse too big for crow. This is the Goyle bottom, the clogged and leaf-logged anticlimactic place where all loose items come to rest. A cult among blackthorn and bramble, an entry point for one who needs somewhere to be. Squeezed through a gap by a wounded oak, bark torn away down one flank, revealing the pulled meat inside. Turn your back on the light and crawl in. You will own this parcel of land, said the solicitor, as if it came wrapped and containing secrets. From here, he clicked his propelling pencil, to here. When you tried to pace it later, that line was lost inside a hedge, wandered over a stream and back again. Still, there was a Goyle, and that's a boundary, map or no map. No one fights over a Goyle. But it is not a line on a map. It's a throat, gouged out by flood, shut in by sky. No place for human traffic. Dank, trackless, mostly impassable. Dusk starts early here, goes viral. Wind rattles its keys in the locks. Information rushes along the top road and does not turn down the lane. No use interrogating your screens. They always show the same old answers. Walk out of the house and let their power drain to nothing. As you go, a helicopter tracks you, then loses you. And now the Goyle is the deep groove you think along. Like this sprawling holly where the sparrow enters and follows its spiky logic, room to room. How did the water eat so deep a channel, now no more than a seep? Cold sweat runs down the face of the wall. Lick it, you'll find it sweet. It runs into a basin of roots lined with moss, where the twisted feet of trees grip the sill. You long to find, of course you do, an arrowhead, potsherd, or axe. The Goyle does hold these things. But the past is so present, your own life so compressed, you barely exist here, and such a discovery could wall up time. So inch forward, looking and trying not to look. A drop swells on the lip of a leaf and falls, like a word being said, breaks in the green basin and runs away, not quite to nothing. Then a small silence before the next drop gathers and speaks. Wait the silences, the way you used to wait between the chimes of a clock as you crossed a square in some town or other, listening for the bell to tip and swing on its yoke, for the tongue to flex and utter its one word, the only word in the language. This hour no different from the hour just spent or squandered, this day like every other, and each moment tending towards the next. The toll of the bell, the dripping tap, the footsteps echoing and draining away. But that was another life. Now the way darkens ahead. Go under a prostrate branch and over a high threshold to a staircase of black roots. An ash squats above you like an old king with robes hitched up. Time, too, is propped on nothing, parts seized with mud, could simply fold with us inside it. Look, on this dead branch, the fungus they call King Alfred's cakes. Just a folk name, like shepherd's purse, lady's mantle, cuckoo spit. But likeness collapses before your eyes. They don't resemble cakes, they are them, snatched from the fire and flung through the open door by a hard-pressed woman who doesn't know he's the king or doesn't care. You useless bugger, can't you get anything right? Yes, that must be it. Whatever happened anytime, anywhere, is happening here, now. Hush, hush, you're tired. Get you out from under the royal privy. Look for somewhere safe to rest. Ivy makes a good bed. Huge leaves, supple as leather, glossy as hearts. Ivy will work its enchantment. A green throat, through which voices are funneled and mysteriously reversed. The shriek of an owl in hunt, a chainsaw, a fallen lamb. A throat that swallows things too, and will swallow you if you want. You can lie hidden from the helicopter, and the moon with her blistered face, and the rookery blasted by gunshot. Forget the house, the lane, the square. Lie on your bed of ivy till it's over. Black fruits glowing in the rafters. Bees in the brain of the hollow log. Broken gate jammed across the ditch.
Thank you so much, Jean. And it truly is just a remarkable collection and a real privilege to hear you read from it as well. So thank you for that. And I guess I wanted to start off by, I mentioned green noise in that introduction as well, where maybe some of these kind of ideas are beginning to surface that then feel like they really canter and kind of gallop within this collection. And whilst it, I guess, continues some of those themes, both from the non-fiction and the poetry, this feels like a really new way of working for you as well. These kind of long untitled sequences, the very kind of rigid form within each one. And I just wondered for you how they arrived, I guess, or did it feel like a very different way of constructing both an individual poem and a collection for you?
Yeah, that is such a good question. And I really like it that you mentioned that connection with green noise. I mean, I think that, I don't know if you find this, but every book that I write has, there is a kind of line of connection that I can see between that book and the previous one. But never more so than here, where it feels to me now that green noise was a kind of limbering up exercise for this book, though, of course, I didn't think that or know that at the time. So yeah, in that sense, it's very much within the scope of my previous concerns and preoccupations, I guess. But you're right, in other ways, it's a complete break with my earlier work. It's like a sort of, for me, a kind of astonishing departure from my normal way of working or my previous way of working. And that's partly a result of the kind of single narrative that the book holds. I mean, it's split into 3 sections, but the poems are quite interlinked. There's quite a lot of repetition and near repetition between them, just of words, of images, of motifs, but also not only the fact that there is this single narrative, but also that, as you say, there's one form throughout this book. I mean, all these pieces are, I'm going to call them sonnets. And that's really quite scary. But what I mean by that is 14 lines with a turn, a volta or a turn. And those are the only things about the sonnet, quite frankly, that I'm interested in. The rest I think of as frills, but don't quote me. So they're all 14 lines long and they all have a turn in them. So there they are. They're, every poem in the book has this same quite exacting form. And I never would have dreamt that I would do this. I've always been someone for whom the form has kind of arrived organically in the process of writing. And it was just that the first few that I wrote seemed to need to be about this length. I'm thinking now of something that the poet Don Patterson said about the sonnet, that it's a roughly square block of black text on a white field. And that there's something about that is kind of eternally interesting to the poet. So hundreds of years after this form first emerged, it still has an interest, holds an interest for the poet. And that might be partly why. But there came a point where I thought, well, I can't just keep writing these. Every book needs variety. The reader needs variety. And I started to experiment with different forms on the page. But you know what the really experimental thing was, and the really radical thing for me, was saying, no, I'm not going to do that. They're all going to have this same form. And that was like turning a key in a lock. It was a surprising thing for me. But I knew that it had to be that way. I mean, how do these decisions emerge? They emerge out of the writing, don't they? But once I'd got that, my way was clear to just write and write and write. And I actually wrote them more quickly than I normally do, which might not be saying much.
Thank you so much. And I love this idea that we've got there's the kind of Shakespearean sonnet or the Petrarchan sonnet, and now we've got the Sprackland sonnet which we can teach to our students in years to come. But just on that kind of drafting process, because we're going to, I think in a later section of our chat, talk much more about Elemental, this exhibition that we're in. But people will notice as they're sat down that we have these kind of notes on the field notes, I guess, and kind of drafts on the bookshelves. And just how do these relate to what then ends up as that sonnet, as that very type form, if at all?
This is me kind of turning myself inside out and showing the workings in a way that, again, feels slightly scary. This is how I often work. I mean, it's basic, isn't it? It hardly amounts to a method. Just take a book with you wherever you go and write stuff down. That's all these are. And in a way, you know, they look really rough and ready, and there's all kinds of slightly embarrassing stuff in there that didn't find its way into the poems. But what surprises me when I look at them now is how much of it did go into the poems. There are whole phrases that have ended up in there. And it's not as if I went back to the notebook and worked from it. I didn't. Because I'm a really... I have a... Well, I don't know. I used to say I'm really disorganized about notebooks. But now I think that is, in its own way, a method. So what I do is I write things in the notebook, and then I lose the notebook. I mean, every time I lose the notebook. I can't remember which notebook it was. I don't know where it is. So then I work without it. But by then, there's something about the physical action of writing those notes that has internalized something which I'm able to draw on. It's not that I sit there and try and remember what I wrote. It's just that it's there because I wrote it down. It probably is not at all unique to me. But yeah, there they are. And they have, and I know we're going to talk about the exhibition in a minute, but I've just extracted a few kind of phrases from there that felt key and scrawled them on the wall over there. So you can see from here, the idea is that you can see the notes and you can see the photographs of the Goyle through between these notes. And then you can see little bits of it scrawled on in between the photographs as well.
Okay, I love that phrase, this is you kind of turned inside out. And it's kind of worth, I think, reflecting on the generosity of that as well, for, you know, from you to an audience. I wanted to ask about, in that first poem that you read us during that first reading, this wonderful moment where you say, so old it has become interesting, and suddenly you remember art. And I just guess one of the things that runs so much through this collection is this idea of time and memory, both that in ecological kind of huge expanse of ecological time, but also the self and aging and the kind and the body itself. And just, yeah, if you could say a little bit, I guess, about how time and the idea of time and poetry seem to be in conversation in these poems.
Yeah, I mean, I've always found myself writing about time and about that sense that time is not this simple, linear, chronological thing that we commonly think of in our kind of daytime lives, if you like. But the sort of dream aspect of time, where different points in time can coexist in the same space. And I think I've always been interested in that since childhood. Probably all kids are, kind of, you know, just not having it, you know, having this sense that it's more complicated than it appears to be. And this is really very important in this book. And as I say, that's partly because of these kind of weird time disruptions that I experienced, that made me just more open to that sense of having access to the past, I guess. And thinking about, you're right, you know, thinking about small scale temporal kind of shifts as well as massive ones over geological time. And that place being a good place to think about that, because the evidence of that is all around you. I mentioned in that little sequence the microliths, the little stone tools that are found quite a lot in that part of the Blackdown Hills. There's a I ended up dedicating the book to the memory of an amazing woman who spent 40 years of her life just walking in the Blackdown Hills and picking up these microliths. And she collected thousands of them. And, you know, she was just walking in the 1 or 2 fields near her own house, so it's hyper-local. Very small-scale local, but massive scale in terms of time. And then there are other things as well, like the Chert, which is the kind of protagonist, if you like, of the second part of the book. So yeah, it's very much about time and its kind of mysteries, I guess.
And I think, and just before we hear from that second part of the collection, I think, which I say so that we can tee up the smooth bringing in of the lectern and microphone stand in just a moment. But I guess just because of what you were saying about, it's well choreographed this, what you were saying about time there and about I guess, how this place allows that to come through in these ways. Does that bring us back to the idea of form as well, that there's something about these, it's a very kind of, it's interesting as you move through the book as one sits to read it without kind of separate titles, because everything has this rigid form. It flows in this very certain way, and one can move through it in a very certain way, more so than a very solid title, single lyric poem on a page, and then another one that's about something else. And is there something about the form that allows that sense of, I guess, 3-dimensional time that you're describing to come through?
Yeah, I think so. And I think when you're talking about huge things, you know, like these kind of geological dimensions of time, or big kind of feelings and big ideas in a poem, then form can be really important. I mean, of course, every poem has form, but, you know, thinking about the vessel into which you're going to be able to put this stuff, this strong feeling, this big idea, this big space, temporal or geographical or whatever it is, this pain, this grief, whatever the stuff of your poem is, you know, you need something to put it in. And I feel that sometimes, you know, the constraint of form is what makes it possible to write these poems, to speak about these things. And yeah, I can't remember what the rest of your question was. I'm sorry, but there was something. I
was so mesmerised by your answer, I can't either. But that's
no. But I remember there was something about a journey
about
through
the way one moves through the book, unimpeded by that idea of a single poem with a block title, a single poem with a block title. There's a flow to this, a kind of almost a cadence of rhythm as one moves through it too.
Yes, and I think that I've always been interested in the sequence of poems, and I've always thought of it previously when I've written them, and also when I've read other people's, as kind of walking round a subject and looking in through a number of different windows, and you get a different view on your subject. But this is not really like that. I mean, here I really am walking. I really am moving through a space. In the first section, I'm doing this quite linear moving. I mean, I might call it scrambling rather than walking. But, you know, it's through this Goyle, through this, you know, line, this throat. Then in the second part, you know, I'm in these fields picking things up and looking at them and thinking about the way these rocks are distributed across that field and everything. And in the third part, which we will come to, the difficulty of walking on very wet, boggy ground. So these are actual journeys as well as conceptual ones.
And it's that second section that we're going to hear a little bit from now, I think, Jean. Is that right?
Great. Thank you. Okay, so I've brought a piece of Chert with me. Oh, thank you. There it is. There's no typical piece of Chert, really, and there are lots more distributed around on the windowsills here and all over the place as part of the exhibition. So, but as you can see, it's kind of ordinary looking. It's got some quite interesting colours in it. It's a bit gnarled and a bit sort of, you know, nothing special, really, you might say. My assistant will take it. It's sometimes described as inferior flint. It's not proper flint. Flint is quite prized in certain ways. Chert is not really prized. It's used locally to build, or it was used, and still is, I think, to some extent, to build houses. But it basically lies around all over the place. And it wouldn't matter how many houses you built, there'd still be endless amounts of chert. There are a couple of dialect words in these poems that I'm going to read about chert. One dialect word. The word is clome, which is a West Country word, and it means crockery or earthenware. And then there are some geology and archaeology words, which you probably know already. Radiolarian and diatom. These are both tiny little microscopic creatures, or they were, that are found in the fossil record. And they are, of great interest to archaeologists. And then two words about the formation of rock, lithification and diagenesis. So they're about this very, very, very long-term process of sediment becoming rock. Chert. A woman walks the same field for 40 years, and the field speaks to her because it knows her. She stops, picks up a word, and with quick eyes and hands translates it. Knife, arrowhead, pick, adze. It's a vocation, like sitting and listening while someone talks. Pain worked to the surface, words shaped into tools. The field itself brings them forth from the utter dark of the deep self. Oh, rubbish, she thinks. It's just walking and finding. She ought to stop. The shelves are stacked with them. The cold gets in her hip. But the field speaks. The pain outcrops, and she bends to pick it up. Not the Delft blues of true flint, nor the Prussian blue of blue lias, not the glassy delicacy of quartz, but this brown and white vernacular of waxy fracture, knuckled and veined, charred and patched. Struck with steel, it spits out a spark, but in the local dialect. Cropping at every step of the boot and every cut of the spade, on the enclosure fields behind the avenues of beech, and the valley fields that curve under ash and alder and still answer to their old names. Thick-set and serviceable, like farmhouse crockery in a charity shop, and in the same outmoded colours. Hard-wearing, hard to shift these days, the kind of stuff your grandparents could afford, but not afford to lose. Who knows where it went and where it is now, their cupboard full of clome, none of it matching, most of it chipped or crazed. No end to the fields you'd have to search to find the shattered pieces of yourself. But look, under the hawthorn hedge. Surely that's the plate you loved as a child, the one with the strange design of clouds you gazed at so long it came to feel like a mirror. At dusk, it gives off a dim glow, like those rags of foam spun when the river is high. At night, from an upstairs window, you see it considered by moonlight. It is at its most eloquent then. But this is not the whole story. When you walk the field and bring back stones in your pocket, you bring back plastic too, shreds of bright stuff, dividing and dividing again in their cellular determination to survive over every timescale. Midsummer, birdsong stripped from the air's stems. Down by the river, the old house is scattered. You stand and say their names, but there's no echo. You clamber over the tumps and cairns, walking and finding, but it's all fish tins, clay pipes, brown bottles. Under the rusty trees, stones keep their mossy silence. Language itself is prone to collapse, you think. It's like an old house where the rain gets in and ruins everything. The walls sag, the ceilings cave. One room of words falls through into another. To build a new house, you must begin by walking the field and picking up stones. You must heave and heap them, barrow them over car, drag them through mire, chuck them and stack them till your hands bleed. You need thousands, but the field will not miss them, any more than you missed the words you spoke. They were on the air and gone. Too late to call them back, too far to find the place. So start again, start again. Illness has scrambled the year. Midwinter, and the ground is white with frost, yet the oak across the field is in leaf. No, look again, those leaves are starlings. And listen, their noise is the noise of meltwater hurtling over stones, uprooting and flinging them downstream. Smoke rises from the white grass. There will be thaw. The stream will run like milk. Despite all losses, you are still alive. Now the tree shakes out its leaves, the sky tumbles with ash, and that thump in your chest is the bolt being thrown as the year lurches open on the heart's old hinges. A woman walks the same river for 40 days. She comes here to recover. Underfoot, the bed of chert. Under it, green sand. Under it, ooze. The stones bear tiny figures, most too small to see. Diatom, radiolarian. Sometimes a suggestion of texture, comb, feather. So this is meaning, she thinks. Minor bodies in their millions, scuttled and sinking, becoming sediment. Day and night collaborate on the difficult work of translation. Stars flare and fade, ice swells and shrinks. Diagenesis, lithification. Now the river brings them forth from the utter dark of the deep self. She stops, picks up a word.
Thank you so much again, Jean, for reading to us from that second section. And I guess I want to come, because of so much of the content of what you've just read us from that second section of this book, to this idea of language. And both we heard in one phrase in one of those poems that you read us about this idea of language being quite fragile, language being something potentially prone to collapse. And yet also these poems are kind of built on a specificity of the beauty of language, these dialect words, these very specific ecological and kind of words for particular parts of the landscape. And I just wonder for you how that tension felt, I guess, as you were writing these poems, that both language is a fragile thing, and yet it seems to me within this collection your search for the exact right word, even as we heard in one of these poems, no, not that, but this kind of this painstaking search for exactly the right word, even if it only exists in dialect and not in a kind of standardized English.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I don't think there is a contradiction there or a tension there. I think that specificity and that looking for the exact word and the dialect word and the unusual word, which is something that I really kind of relished in the writing of the book, is partly coming from this feeling that we might lose our words, and I guess that has its roots in the experience of being ill, and of sometimes not having ready access to the kind of fluency of language that I was used to having. And I've kind of extrapolated from that and thought about, what a fragile thing it is in a way, our ability to put names to things. It's something that is easily lost. We all know people who have lost that ability, I guess, in old age or otherwise. And also that sense that we regard it a lot of the time as a kind of safe thing, a reliable thing. It's functional. We go about in our daily lives using language, reading language, and it feels as if it holds us in some way. A little like clock time holds us in a kind of safe place. We know, what half an hour feels like. We know what year we live in, and that, there aren't still wolves roaming about in the Blackdown Hills. But at the same time, there sort of are. And, that feeling of safe time is parallel for me to that feeling of safety in language. Actually, it's hard won. And the diversity of dialect words for things is something that I feel, is very rich, and is something we ought to kind of really be investing a lot of attention in. And it's one of the things that I wanted to investigate in the exhibition and get other people who come to the exhibition to kind of contribute a dialect word of their own. I know there are loads of projects that do this, but I'm thinking particularly of landscape words, I guess, words about the environment. Because I think that, our ability to describe our environment in ways that are specific to where we are is incredibly important ecologically, because places are not the same. We kind of move around in urban spaces a lot, I guess, thinking, everywhere's pretty similar to everywhere else. There's the McDonald's, there's the railway. I mean, they're not, of course, cities are not the same. But, we can enter this slightly numbed state where we don't realise how special and specific our environments are. And when we do realise that, it also tells us something, I think, about our kind of fragile and inevitably temporary belonging in them.
And it's that almost like there's something there in, as you held up this piece of Chert and kind of talked us through it a little bit, is there something in the kind of physically then touching the environment, physically kind of being in these spaces, but not just being in them, but feeling them, kind of physically kind of connecting the body to them, that helps with that, to find that language, or helps to stave off some of that collapse of language, potentially?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think the idea of the collapse of language is very related to illness. That sense that it's something, the rain could get in. The rain can get into an old house. I was looking at this, what's left, the ruins of an old house. There isn't a lot of it left. It's very close to our place in the Blackdowns. And it just seemed, I was thinking about the process of collapse. So once a hole is made in the roof, that's kind of the end game, isn't it? The rain is going to get in through that, and it's going to destroy everything eventually. And I was just thinking about these holes that I had in my own memory and in my language, I guess, my access to language. at the time. I mean, this was a great experience. I'm making it sound terrible. It was great because it was revelatory, you know, and not to be able to find things, to find memories, very specific memories, and not to be able to find the language for things, and not to be able to read very well, certainly on a screen, not to be able to read words on a screen. You know, this is all kind of amazing and interesting. I'm thinking now of that thing about writers having every writer having a sliver of ice in the soul. You know, so whatever horrible experience you're going through or someone near you is going through, like, you know, an ambulance is called and someone's lying flat out on the street, there's a little bit of you that's going, that is so interesting. I know I'll write a poem about that one day.
Well, that could be a Sprackland sonnet. When that happens. And I guess in a way to move us into the third section, because this is where a lot of this sort of work is happening, I think. What you use that word revelatory, and to me, so much of the revelatory power of this book is in your use of image, in your use of simile, which really kind of throws together this natural world and the human world in sometimes ways that are either frightening or kind of disconcerting or kind of upset the natural rhythm that we might expect. And so these astonishing images of the stuttering machines, of the warbler and the nightjar, these haunting images, the buzzard call, like the desperate whistle of a search party, and these images that both, so the kind of beauty or the sublime of the natural world is then haunted by this human world. And I guess, was that imagery or those descriptions a way of just the human always intruding on what otherwise might be an undisturbed space in those images?
Yeah, I mean, this is not some kind of idyllic pastoral world that I'm trying to evoke here. And it's not a kind of, you know, it's not exempt from all the things about the Anthropocene that we know. I mean, that's why I mentioned about bringing back plastic in the pocket. Because this is not some pristine environment. It's a very unusual environment, but it's not untouched. And I think this is something actually that I really started to do in Green Noise in my previous collection, was thinking there was an image on the cover of that of a beetle, but when you look closely you can see that the inside is actually clockwork, it's mechanical. This kind of, I'm really interested in collapsing these boundaries, you know, in terms of time and in terms of other things, but also the kind of human and the other.
Well, I think of that great image, you know, spring with all your levers thrown to max, that the kind of mechanical, industrial, quite scary nature of something that is meant to be kind of, you know, spring, oh, it's spring and it's kind of bucolic and it's bringing us life, but all your levers thrown to max, it's something industrial and as you say, it's collapsing that boundary somehow, isn't it?
Yeah, and in that poem, which is not in this book, it's in the previous book, you know, spring is actually really scary and violent. And yeah, so I've been interested for a long time in kind of disrupting these ideas of these simple pastoral ideas, I guess, and in kind of thinking about how, you know, we just can't anymore think about humans over here and everything else over there. I mean, we all know this. And it's just trying to find a language for that, you know, that we're actually, you know, it's all one piece, it's all one fabric.
Fantastic. And before we talk about the exhibition and kind of get into what that process has felt like and kind of these visuals that we find ourselves surrounded by, would you like to read for us from the third section of this book? So Mire, the third part, that's how I pronounce it, isn't it? Yeah, there we go. Fantastic. So we're going to hear from the third part of this book now.
Thank you. Yeah, so I suppose everyone knows what mire is. It's bog, essentially. And this section of the book, I've used as an epigraph, I've used a quote from a book by Tim Robinson the slow self-inhumation and self-resurrection of the bog. So mire is a very big part of this environment that I'm talking about in the Blackdown Hills. It's really why the place has changed so much more slowly than other places, because the land, certainly in parts of it and in the valley I'm talking about, are not really usable for anything. You can't grow crops on them. You can't do farming except at a very small scale. So you've still got these small fields, ancient hedgerows, and where there's farming, there are just, a few sheep or a few cattle. And the ground is just very rough and wet. And basically, it's slowly, ever so slowly, turning to peat. And I suppose that the connection there, the kind of mapping of that across to the body and myself and illness, is that, I felt I experienced a kind of self-inhumation and self-resurrection over that time. In these poems that I'm going to read, I'm referring at one point to the taking of samples of mud cores. You know what I mean? When they put an auger or a sampler into the ground and you kind of turn a handle, you pull out this core of mud. They do it with ice as well sometimes. And when an archaeologist or someone working in that kind of area will look at these mud cores, they can read a lot of very rich information about the deep past, particularly by looking at pollen, but not only that. And so it's a bit like time travel, I guess, that the nearest thing to it, perhaps. And at the same time, I'm kind of, eliding that with thinking about the brain, which, of course, is the bit that is affected by meningitis. Some ordinary virus gets across the blood-brain barrier. And so there are a couple of bits of brain terminology in there. The pia mater, which is the innermost thin membrane over the brain. I think that's all. So I'm just going to read a few from this section, Mire. All day a buzzard calls over the mire, like the desperate note of a whistle blown by a search party. You are marooned on quag and quaking bog, a dark anoxic brew of mud and dead matter. The water table rises, busts its underground cells and repossesses the house. It oozes up through the kitchen floor and pools between flagstones with a sheen of tannins and the rusty smell of blood, like something loosed from a sump or dumped on a verge up the lane. The carpet rots, the walls slough their plaster, and white salts stand up like hoarfrost on the sill. They have no value, said the agent, spreading his empty hands on the desk. Wet places, these waste places. Through all of history, they have been unproductive, useless for cultivation or construction. Oh, you can try attrition. Dig a drain and coax the water from here to there. Break your back to gain a few yards of mud. It floods back in as if it were tidal. No, he said, with a glance at his watch. I'd forget it if I were you. These barren places are only fit to be fenced off, written off, cursed or wished away. Archaeobotanist, anthropologist, paleontologist, paleoentomologist, all come with their various petitions. All kneel and name what they seek. God of the mire, grant us artifact, ecofact, furnace, cesspit, midden and post hole. Grant us charcoal, pollen, seed and shell, thorax, femur, antler, tooth. Then each scoops a reeking sample to be judged in a tank of clean water. All things float or sink. All are sieved or strained. And under the glare of the laboratory lights, bear witness to what happened when. Flooding, burning, felling, famine, plague. Of course, there are some that prefer the silky obscurity of Mire, its ambiguities, refusals, mongrel ways. Those with bespoke arrangements like breathable skin or multiple hearts. Those who can taste light or walk on water, brew their own poisons, carry their eggs in a rucksack. Hermaphrodites, and some that can enter a temporary state of death when they need to. But today, they are bycatch. It's the pollen you want. Now the slim core is drawn to the surface, and behind it, the sucking sound of all the wet valves closing. It's not like drilling into rock, more like gentling with a silver instrument through the soft matter of the hippocampus, probing deeper, finding its way between fish tins, clay pipes, brown bottles, rags of sacking spored with smallpox, pieces of wooden trackway where we walked barefoot from one dry island to the next, nudging aside the figured Chert, going right to the edge of autobiographical memory. Then, under the glare of the theatre lights, turning to your assistant and exclaiming, "So many losses, yet we are still alive." The illness pressed at one wet valve, then another and another, trying its luck until it sprang a lock. It forded the subarachnoid space, knifed a hole in the pia mater, and was in, roaming the salons and sculleries of the brain, looking for things to break. Petty vandalism, nothing more. Words melted over a flame, wiring torn from time cells and dumped in the optic chasm. Nothing that couldn't be survived. All day, a buzzard calls over the mire, like the scream of someone waiting to be found. But now from the floating house comes a voice, lifting a string of beads and touching them in the order the gods require. 40s, chromaty, fourth and tine, dogger to German bite by way of fisher. Forecast, the line of the mind baited and thrown into the heaving future. There may be nowhere to go, but there is always this, listening in the dark, adrift on a craft built from toothpicks and tweezered through the neck of a bottle. Northeasterly backing northerly 3 to 5. No rift in the waves to show your passage. No change of dialect among the gulls.
Thank you so much, Jean. And just at the very end, we're going to hear a final poem, I think, from the collection. But before that, we've been kind of threatening to all evening, so we now should think about Elemental, this fantastic exhibition curated by the brilliant Paulina Shizover-Wright for us as well. And I guess, first of all, is this the first time you've worked in this way, to kind of put a book onto the walls of a space and into the walls of a gallery and kind of think of it as a visual exhibition?
Absolutely, the first time. And so daunted and clueless was I about how this could happen that the months went by and I did nothing about it. And the wonderful Martin Kratz, who is not able to be here, sadly, this evening because he's moving house, kind of had to get me by the scruff of the neck, really, and say, right, we're going to do something. We're going to make something happen in this space. And of course, there have been other exhibitions here. And so Martin has the experience of how to make it work in this space, because of course you're kind of, there are constraints in terms of, it's a library. People have got to be able to move around and look at the books, and also, sometimes sit and have workshops in here or study in here. So, you haven't got the whole space devoted to it. And Martin, had the experience of kind of thinking about how to make that work in the space. And then it was a kind of key moment, I think, when he brought Paulina on board, who is here somewhere, because she, brought this curatorial eye to the whole thing. And one of the things she said early on was that she thought that there should be a kind of field of Chert. And as soon as I had that idea, I thought, oh yeah, maybe this can be made to work, so that you would kind of roam around this area, picking up bits of rock and looking at them, but it is the first time I've done it, and I think that for someone like me who doesn't really, I don't think of myself as a visual thinker. I feel that that's not my number one strength, that I'm much more of an auditory kind of person. So I've been surprised at every step of the way, really. Something Paulina and Martin have said, well, do this, and then they've done it. And I've thought, oh yeah, okay, yes, of course. So it's been a really great experience. But also another feeling of turning yourself inside out, because I think that, like many poets, I usually kind of guard my process, if that doesn't sound too grand, my writing process quite jealously, and don't really want to kind of, it's not really that I don't want to share it, it's that I don't want to look at it myself. I don't really want to think about it, because I have this superstition that if I look too hard at how I do it, I won't be able to do it anymore. That may be rubbish. So there is this kind of discomfort that I had to get through as well. But it's also very exciting. It's always exciting, isn't it, to work outside your scope, to work at the edges and beyond the edges of what you've done before and think you can do.
And he has produced this remarkable exhibition that I do really encourage you to either spend some time with while books are being signed and this evening, or do come back and spend some time with it. I guess the first time I encountered it all and was kind of watching it as it came together, was struck by all these different kind of mediums that you're working with. As people arrived early enough, we heard your voice before you arrived, kind of being played out into space. There are kind of sound mixers. There's the video that people can watch or engage with through the headphones as well. And we have then also the photographs, your notes that we've talked about, but also these physical objects, and what was really important, I think, before was, as you said, pick them up. That this is somehow an exhibition that is inviting us to be involved with, partly through this collection of dialect words, partly through people's own field drawings if they want to, but also just the actual fact that some of the items, such as the log, are behind a glass case because they need to be to protect it. But a lot of this stuff we can pick up and kind of hold in our hand and feel it. And that feels an important part of it that takes it beyond the pages of a book, I guess. Yeah, that is exciting. And it's a book that is about the materiality. It's about the material world, so much so that it would, I can't really see any other way we could have done it. But the lengths we went to, I mean, this is Chert that has come from the Blackdown Hills. A courier came in a van, and we kind of picked up, I think it was 50 kilograms of Chert, which sounded a lot. It took about 5 minutes because it's everywhere. And in doing that, it was kind of a wonderful experience, because I was picking up pieces and going, oh, wow, look at that one. That's really beautiful. And then the next one was like, oh, that's completely different. Look at that. It's got quite a glassy bit of surface there, and it's quite, it got an interesting pattern in it. They are all different. But yeah, they should be picked up. Some of them are a bit heavy. Don't drop them on your foot would be my, from painful experience, I would say. That's my recommendation. And then the log, which actually is behind glass principally because it's a biohazard.
apparently. So, yes, so it's not really to protect the log so much, although I'm sure it does do that, but it's to protect, I don't think us, but maybe the trees growing locally, because of course when you move a piece of a tree from one location in the country to another, there is the potential that you're bringing pathogens that would then affect local trees. And then there are some jars as well in the bookcases that have little collections of found objects in them. And also, yes, so the recordings which have been put together by, I think they're so amazingly well put together by Jamie Burkett, and include some sounds that have been collected by some of his, or at least one of his students. And there is also work here that has been made by some of Jamie's students in response to the book and in response to the exhibition. So it is quite it's a very collaborative thing, and it will continue to be so. There are still elements that we're working on, including with some of the people in the audience here on the front row who are going to, I think, make a film, I hope. So it has a life. It will be here till October, and it will be added to over that time. And I'm just really grateful to all the people who've had input into it.
Thank you so much. And in just a second, we're going to hear a final reading from this astonishing collection of Jean's. But we're going to hear in a minute, because I'm going to run through a list of thank yous. We'll kind of hear the size of the collaboration, I think, that's gone into this exhibition. I've just got a vision now of the courier kind of turning up, trying to pick up this box and going, what's in this, rocks? And you're just going, yes. But thank you all so much for coming out this evening and being here for this launch of both this exhibition and this astonishing new collection of Jean's, of which there are many copies at the back, so please do call at Blackwell's at the back and pick up a copy of this. There's also copies there of Jean's two most recent non-fiction books, so Night Vision and also these Silent Mansions, both of which have themes that I think echo through this collection as well as Green Noise, which has had quite a lot of airtime this evening, unpredictably, but that's also for sale at the back, so you should pick up a copy of that as well. And do, as I say, spend time exploring this exhibition, adding your own dialect words, adding your own field drawings to it as well. We must thank again Paulina Chisover-Wright for excellent curation of the exhibition, the Centre for Place Writing, the Poetry Research Group and the Arts and Humanities Doctoral College for their funding of the project, Jake Beddoe for the design of the exhibition and the brochure, images of which we see behind us on the screen. We should thank Andrew Brooks from the library for his support with the audio tech, Alice James at the National Trust who helped us safely source our rotten log despite it being a biohazard, Jamie Burkett who works on the BA Music and Sound Design for these mixing of Jean's words that she was just mentioning, and the recordings, and the students as well whose work you can engage with here and who've all engaged amazingly with the work and with the exhibition. Michael Fairfax, whose fantastic photograph is both the cover image of this book and is blown up to life-size more than life-size behind us here in this fantastic image, which we're really grateful to have. Owen Ramsey, Nathan Taylor and the rest of the galleries team for installing the work. Martin Kratz, we mentioned Becky Swain, Kay Chu, Deborah Witch, Emma Cockcroft at Manchester Poetry Library and the Light and Cultural Services here at Manchester Met. It's like an Oscar speech, this, and I've not won anything. I want to thank, this has come from Martin, we want to thank Jean's publisher, Jonathan Cape, for giving us permission to use text from the book in the exhibition, as well as this image. And a warm welcome to Tyler from Reform Radio and the Deaf Digital Productions, who will be beginning their own project, as Jean mentioned, connected to this exhibition. And we're really excited to welcome some of that team here tonight. It's an honour to have them with us. And thank you, as always, to Sam and to Will for tech support, to our student ambassadors, but also to Jude and Lindsay, who've done fantastic BSL interpretation, which has helped to make this event hopefully accessible alongside the captions that we've had on the screen. So in a minute we'll rush to the back, buy books, finish off the alcohol and the non-alcoholic drinks that we have. We'll explore the exhibition, but we're going to finish off, Jean, with just a final reading from this book. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was really mega, wasn't it? You're exhausted now. You're going to have a lie down. I think that I just want to echo, just pick out one of those thanks, which is, well, two. It's the two research groups that I am involved with here at Manchester Met, the Poetry Research Group and the Centre for Place Writing, both of which have been absolutely formative in this work. There was a kind of experimental version of the beginning part of this book that was published on some web pages that the Centre for Place Writing put up, Place 2020. It's changed a fair bit since then, and it's become something bigger and a little different from how it was kind of originally conceived. But both these research centres have become, you know, a kind of home for me. I've been here a long time now, and I've been here long enough to get slightly teary-eyed about my feeling of belonging. And, you know, having a foot in each of those research groups is really fantastic, and it's full of wonderful colleagues. So thank you so much to them. This last poem I'm going to read then is the last poem in the book, and it's a poem in which we return to the mire itself. And there are all these species that thrive in that kind of environment, and they're often really endangered, really fragile species. You might know about the sundew. It's a carnivorous plant, quite small and really beautiful, actually, but obviously deadly if you are an insect. It will catch you. And there's a mention of a couple of those insects here, a skimmer and a fritillary. There's also, in this kind of environment, you get a lot of sphagnum moss, which kind of swells up when it fills with water. So here I'm just returning at last, after this long kind of journey, to this very special bit of the environment that I'm in. Sundew primes its red traps for the keeled skimmer with his gold and lattice work, and the pearl-bordered fritillary, fresh from her natal feast of marsh violet. Sphagnum mosses drink in draught after draught, swell into hummocks, spread into rafts, where sedge flings out its extravagant plumes of seed. Underground, the mire preserves its dead, guarding its acids, locking out oxygen, starting the long translation from clay to peat. Overhead, nightjar and warbler test their stuttering machines. Thank you so much for coming and listening. Thank you.